Because of the man who lost half a foot when his transmission blew, all dragsters now carry their engines behind the driver. There is only one line in history books that talks about how much Don Garlits' life cost. He is 94 years old. After that, move on. What they don't say is what it took to make it that long and set those marks. In what way did the son of a dairy farmer from Tampa become the man that the sport kept trying to kill? The fire that ought to have killed him. The man he became was someone who wouldn't stay down. His birthday is the 14th of January, 1932, and he was born in Tampa, Florida. In a time before professional drag racing, he was the son of a dairy farmer. He made his first car in his own shed and named it Swamp Rat 1. He set records in the quarter mile by the late 950 seconds, which caught the attention of people in the sports world. He set records and won races, which is how he got the name that would stick with him for the rest of his life. He moved quickly. He had no fear. He was about to find out how little those traits could protect a person in the early days of nitromethane. At a race in Chester, South Carolina in 1959, his dragster caught fire from nitromethane. He had third-degree burns on his face, arms, and legs when the flames hit him before he could do anything. He was taken to a nearby hospital, where doctors told him the news that would have ended the career of almost any other driver. They planned to cut off both of his hands. A racer who doesn't have hands isn't really a racer. There, his wife Pat stepped in and changed the past of drag racing in a quiet way. She wouldn't let them hold his hands. She found a different doctor at a different hospital in Florida and rode the train south with her husband while he was in terrible pain. She wouldn't accept that the man who built and drove those cars would lose the ability to do either of those things. It was the first time she pulled him away from the edge. It wouldn't be the last one. It wouldn't be the last one. In the years that followed, she kept pulling him back, often when everyone else thought he was done. Garlits beat the chances and was back behind the wheel in just a few months. The fire didn't make him more careful. In a way, it proved something that would shape his life for the rest of it. He was told that the sport was dangerous and would keep trying to hurt him. He was also told that the only fair reaction was to make the cars safer instead of making the drivers more scared. After 10 years, the sport would get its first real piece of him. But by that time, he knew the lesson that would shape all of his comebacks from then on. Here it's easy to see the pattern of his life. Garlits didn't have a single terrible event. He had several of them over many years, and each one was worse than the last. The amazing thing is not that they happened, but what he made out of the pieces of them. The fire was just the beginning. It was one afternoon in California that he did something that changed him and the sport as a whole. What did happen at Lyons Drag Strip in 1970? That day it hurt his foot. It was that moment that completely split his life and his car in half. When? The 8th of March, 1970 at Lyons Drag Strip in Long Beach, California, the last round of a big top fuel event was going on. It was a front-engine slingshot dragster, like the kind where the driver sits just behind the front wheels and in front of almost all the mechanical parts. Garlits was driving Swamp Rat 13. On that day, he was testing a 2-speed transmission that he had designed himself and put together from bits of a Chrysler automatic. The Garlits Drive was his name for it, and this afternoon he was putting his trust in it for the final round. He had just barely taken off when the transmission went bad. The transmission spun to about 20,000 turns per minute in Newt, before it just fell apart because of a part called a sprag that rolled over. In a front-engine car, that metal that was going off was right in front of the driver's feet. The blast tore through the front of the chassis, dividing the car in half before the cabin. It also cut off a piece of Garlits' right foot. People were hurt when shrapnel flew into the crowd. In the seats, there was a young boy among them. He managed to stay alive. He was saved by the reinforced cockpit cage, and he was pulled alive from the wreckage. Even though he lost half of his right foot, he was rushed to the hospital, where doctors cut off the rest of the damage. He would race for the rest of his career with a foot that had been fixed. An injury that bad and would not heal would have been the end for almost any other driver. What should you do when the thing you love and think you're the best at has just taken a piece of your body? There's no reason why most people would have answered no to that question. Garlits began to draw while he was lying in his hospital bed. He had decided that the issue wasn't with racing itself, but with how the cars were built and how the driver was sitting next to a bomb. Weird explosions would happen away from the driver instead of into it if the engine and transmission were moved behind them. The idea wasn't really new. He would be the only one who could make it work. That's the part the doubters were going to overlook. So, the injury that should have put him out of the sport for good made him rebuild it from the ground up. But what makes the story so strange is that the next machine he made did more than just save his job. It went on to save the lives and bodies of drivers he would not meet for many years. The whole thing was drawn in a hospital room next to a man who didn't believe him yet. How did a driver who couldn't move build the car that changed drag racing? The car that kept everyone alive. He mostly did it in a wheelchair while he was getting better at a Long Beach hospital. During his free time, Garlits and fellow racer Tom McEwen watched the TV show Star Trek and worked out the shape of a car that didn't exist yet. Behind the driver would be the engine and transmission. In front of almost everything that could blow up, the driver would sit. It seems clear now. It was madness in 1970, when 100 front-engine cars were already on the road. Other builders have tried making rear-engine dragsters before, but all of them were slow, hard to control, or just not competitive. Garlits thought the problem was with how it was done, not with the idea itself. After getting home, Garlits used his wheelchair to go to his shop in Seffner, Florida, and started cutting out the parts by hand on a bandsaw. He later gave a clear account of it. He said that the transmission had blown up and killed him. It also split the car in half, so he sat in a chair and drew plans for a championship rear-engine car. He also cut the parts out himself. He worked with T.C. Lemons and Connie Swingle to turn those pictures into metal. A man who couldn't stand up yet built the whole car. It was named Swamp Rat 14 and was put to the test for the first time at the 1971 Winter Nationals in Pomona, California. Some drivers made fun of it. Some people wouldn't even line up next to the machine, which looked really weird. Garlits didn't just get in. There were a lot of classic front-engine cars in the race, but he won it in its first national event. He used an idea that everyone else had thrown out to beat everyone who had thrown it out. People who were laughing looked very interested all of a sudden. In just 2 years, almost every top-fuel dragster in the world had made the same car. He came up with the rear-engine plan after hurting his own foot. It became the standard because it kept the driver out of the way of the explosions that had been killing and hurting racers for 10 years. He lost a body part, but the car that took it cared for hundreds of men he would never meet. No number has been kept track of for how many feet, hands, and lives Swamp Rat 14's family of cars saved. By any measure, it is one of the most important safety improvements in the history of racing. He made sure that everyone else was safe on the worst day of his work life. It is the of irony that sounds too cool to be true, but it is real and can be found in a museum in Ocala. But there was a person behind all of those tools, behind every comeback and every new idea. This person is rarely mentioned in record books. So, who was the woman who made the story make sense? She is the first woman in drag racing. The folks who were there say that there would be no Don Garlits legend without her. Her name was Pat. Patricia Beeger married Don on the 20th of February, 1953. Don was 21 years old at the time, and he had no plans to become a race car driver. They were married for almost 61 years, and she went with him pretty much the whole time, from track to track and disaster to disaster, without ever asking him to stop. In a sport that destroyed marriages as easily as it destroyed cars and fuel, that was enough to make her stand out. Being on the road with a speed racer for 60 years is a lot of time. Her job was never just a show. After the fire in 1959, doctors in South Carolina wanted to cut off Pat's burned hands. He refused, found a doctor in Florida, and took the train south with him. The hands that drew up Swamp Rat 14 would not have been able to hold the pencil without that choice. She wouldn't let go of him, which is a very literal part of the story of Big Daddy. Every title he ever won went through the hands she fought so hard to keep. It's odd that the people who make great things possible are often the ones who people don't see. It was said that she was the first lady of drag racing. After the fact, their daughter Donna said that Pat loved her husband with all her heart, body, and soul, and that she had been by his side through every win, loss, and crash. When Garlits looked back over the years, he put it more simply. He told her, she was the love of his life. She was the one thing that every trophy and scar was compared to. People yelled for Big Daddy, and Pat was always standing just past the lights when that happened. In sports memories, a person's life is often summed up by a single heroic figure at the wheel. That is something that should be thought about. But the truth is that stories that big are usually made up by two people. How many of the records and comebacks were really his? And how many were only possible because someone was ready to ride with him the whole way? By any fair measure, the answer is that they were both one operation. That's why what followed was so hard to handle. Because Garlits had been through fires, explosions, and losing part of his foot, and the sport had made him famous for all of it. Where did the woman who had been there the whole time go? The long goodbye. The theft was long and slow, the kind that can't be stopped by tech. In her later years, Pat got a long illness that included Alzheimer's disease. This is the kind of sickness that takes a person away from the inside while making them painfully present to look at. She was not locked up by Garlits, and he took care of her himself as she slowly got worse over years. He kept her at home in the Ocala house. Friends of the couple from that time said that the man was quietly dedicated to the job. His attention, which was once on a quarter mile, was now on a single room. In every way, it was a work of love as well as duty. Because of its plain shape, you don't need to make up a pain for it. The woman who remembered every race, accident, and road they had driven on together started to forget about the life they had made together bit by bit. Even though Garlits had run faster than every fireball and blast, he couldn't run faster than this. He could only wait and sit with it. Just like he had done with many of his own accidents. You didn't have to change anything about the chassis or the part behind the driver. There was no technical fix at all. Pat passed away at 5:53 p.m. on the 2nd of February, 2014, in their Ocala home. 99. Her husband Garlits was with her and holding her hand. Their 2 children were also there. He wrote in a letter afterward that he had been playing Glenn Miller's big band music in the background because it was her favorite. He also said that the house would be very quiet for a while. In that quiet room, a marriage of almost 61 years came to an end. He had been with the person since he was 21 years old and was now 82 years old. This is the part of his story that isn't shown in clips. It turned out that the cruelest thing that would ever happen to a man was not being burned, having his foot blown off, or seeing his car crash around him at 200 miles per hour. It was being with the person who had always been there for them, and losing her slowly anyway. It was the one enemy he couldn't get away from. He took care of the house. He kept the cars. He held on to the museum that was built around it and was full of the tools they had worked on their whole lives. He kept going, just like he had done after every other disaster. Because he had never learned how to stop. How can a man who has lost the most important person in his life find the drive to keep building? The person who worked hard. It looked like he found it in the work itself. Garlits has made it clear that he can't stop working because, in his mind, stopping is the same thing as dying. So, even though he was in his 80s and 90s, he kept building. With his 2,000 horsepower battery-powered Swamp Rat 37, he set a speed record when he was 82 years old. He did it again when he was 87 years old. This time, he drove an all-electric car nearly 189 miles per hour. In the same decade that most people slow down, he was the first person to try a new kind of race. This electric dragster was being redesigned by the same person who redesigned the gas-powered one. He also kept the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing in Ocala open and running. Even when he was in his 90s, he was still giving tours himself, showing people the cars that had scared him and telling stories in a gravelly voice. In the past few years, journalists who sat down with him said he was smarter and faster in talk than people decades younger. He was also still full of opinions and ideas. He never married again. Most people say that Pat's loss wasn't something he tried to replace, but something he learned to deal with. The Swamp Rat 30 is in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It is the streamlined car that he drove over 270 miles per hour and won a title in. The people who take care of American history thought that what Garlits built was important for everyone in the country, not just one sport. The car that hit him is in Ocala. The car that proved his idea is in the museum of the country. Not many people leave such a big mark on the world. He built one car to show how fast he was and the other to show how he managed to stay alive. This is how the tragedy and the triumph really looked at age 94. He's not a broken man slumped in a corner. He is smart. He is still working. And every day he feels the full weight of what he went through and the people he lost. What's more important in a life like Don Garlits's? The disasters he lived through or the safety he built from all of them? The likely answer is that you can't separate them because they were the same thing to him. Every disaster led to a new idea, and every new idea saved someone else. The man at the center of it all kept going for decades. Even after the sport could no longer hurt him, both the sorrow and the victory are real, and he is still here at age 94 to hold them both. Maybe that's the most interesting thing about him, more interesting than any record. Don Garlits lost half a foot when the transmission blew up, and he turned it into the car that every dragster comes down from. He lost the wife who wouldn't let doctors take his hands. They built a museum in her honor. At 94, he is still young, smart, growing, and strong. Was his life full of tragedy, or did it turn tragedy into safety for everyone?